pleasure of hosting Mr. Ratan Tata with us. Mr. Tata, you're not in the day-to-day business of the Tata Group, of the Tata Motors anymore, I know. But still, we'll be happy to hear your thoughts on this mobility revolution that we're facing.
I think mobility is a somewhat difficult issue to give a view on because it's an industry and a concept that's changing very fast. But for all intents and purposes, we're at the transition of conventional moving of people individually or in groups from point A to point B to a much more open and a highly technologically applied new form of moving people seamlessly and yet as far as possible individually or in groups using vehicles that we don't see today, i.e. operated on electric power or other means, connected to the individual digitally, and using autonomous self-driving technology, artificial intelligence, being flexibly so. So we are today at the cusp of a new era of moving people, and as I mentioned earlier, some point in time it could also be moving people not on the ground, it may be through the air.
Interesting. Can you also share with us about the philosophy of the Tata Group to this change?
Well, I think India has itself set some very ambitious tasks of moving the automotive manufacture to a high degree of electric-driven vehicles. Some major tenders have been issued with a view to give kickstart to the industry. Our company has received an order for 6,000 cars in the first instance that the government will buy. That's
electrical, you mean?
Pardon?
Electrical.
Electrical. Sorry, I mean electric vehicles. And they have set some ambitious tasks for electric-driven vehicles by 2020. So even if India doesn't meet that requirement, it'll meet 60% or 80% of that environment driven by the policy of the government. So it's a very exciting moment. And I would like to say that it's an opportunity for Israel and Indian companies to work together. You have a country that's very innovative and very creative, but you have a small market and you have an expensive manufacturing location. India has a huge population, 1.4 billion people, people who are gaining in prosperity, so the requirement for two-wheelers and three-wheelers will increase. Low-end cars will increase. You have a low-cost manufacturing base. So the two countries could come together. You're in creativity, our low-cost manufacturing base and large market. Maybe together we can look at the world as our market. Dreaming.
Couldn't agree more. I was visiting India last month, and it seems to me like the industries, first of all, it's huge, but for the Israeli market, it seems like I don't want to say not existed, but Israelis tend to look west, especially the startups when they want to sell their product or expand. How do you see, what kind of tip, in a way, you like to give the Israeli entrepreneur if he wants to address the Indian market?
I don't know how to answer that, but India has almost every global car manufacturer in India today. The quantities that they produce, the volumes are very small, and the cost of production, partly due to taxes, is quite high. What's needed is somebody to come in and say we'll break those barriers and do something that's inexpensive, flexible, high in technology, and creative in terms of how they do it. The barriers need to be broken, and maybe India and Israel can do that and export to the surrounding countries quite easily.
Do you see the appetite on the other side, the Indian automakers or the entire value chain receptive to get technology from Israel in that respect?
Probably not. I think most automobile manufacturers have very heavy legacy costs, which lead them to always be a little pessimistic about new technologies. And those new technologies are driven by a single company that decides to break those barriers. Good example is Tesla. One normally wouldn't think of a new company being as successful in electric vehicles as Tesla has been. And maybe we can do that on two-wheelers and three-wheelers in the first instance, and on low-end cars or moving people platforms a little later.
We earlier discussed the issue of the current fleets that exist and the needs to find alternative fuels to such enormous amount of vehicles. Can you share with us what your thought about what are the best options for the current situation, I would say?
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that, because all of us are very excited about what's happening on electric cars and new technologies. But as we look at the world today, we produce about 1 million electric cars in the current year.
Yeah.
And we have about 1 billion internal combustion cars population that exists in the world. And if we forget them and make an assumption that they will just die out, they will not die out. And we have to find solutions that meet the emission requirements and meet the cost requirements. So alternate fuels, be it methanols, be it hydrogen, be it other kinds of biofuels, also we should not forget that it's an important part of the landscape in the years to come.
Yeah. One of the things that we see with this revolution of mobility, there are many other areas that are going to get affected, whether it's starting from the insurance with regards to autonomous driving and even real estate. It's going to change because the landscape of this automotive world is going to change. And I know in Tata Group you're also dealing with many other areas which are outside the automotive. And this area, how do you see the world after this revolution? Are we going to see, are we major change in the way people behave, in the way people will move? Of course, move, but I mean, even there was a lecture yesterday showing how Houston is look like when you don't need a parking space. Suddenly everything is green and beautiful. Do you see the same happening in?
Yes,
being an architect, you have a background on that.
I see, and at the same time I'm very hesitant, because you can see something now and say this is the answer, and it's not the answer. The answer is what happens over the next 5 or 10 years, the evolution. And our eyes need to be open and our minds need to be open to the fact that we're going to be in a fast-moving world, in a new method of moving people, which maybe we're not thinking of today. We're thinking of conventional streets, parking garages, gasoline and diesel fuel, and maybe all of those will, they're not maybe, they will change. And we need to have our minds open, and those countries that will be the most flexible and most open are going to be the ones that are going to be leading the world in this new technology.
Do you also see, we saw in the cellular market, some kind of leapfrog, some countries like India or China, basically leapfrog the entire telecom system by adopting very quickly the mobile and giving up the landline. Do you see that happening in the automotive as well, moving up one generation ahead?
You know, I can look back in time when India produced about 1 million cars a year. This was just a few years ago. We produced 3 million today. At that time, China produced less than 1 million cars. We were slightly bigger than China's production. Today we're 3 million and China is producing 28 million cars. Who would have taken that view a few years ago? So
I don't want to think what will happen to the street of Mumbai if you will, quadruple your production.
unless you solve the other problem.
Yes.
So you have to constantly look at these kind of times with a clean sheet of paper and decide how you're going to solve the problem other than just solve one part of the problem.
Again, going back to this ecosystem approach, energy, for example. If one wants to have an electric vehicle all across India, you also need an infrastructure for the charging, etc. Is this something that you're also dealing with? The solar plus the charging plus the storage. Is this something that as a group you're dealing with?
And the group is actively involved in playing a role in this, both in the electric vehicles, in the charging stations, looking at swappable battery systems and areas like this. But everything is going to be in transition. The greatest danger, perhaps, is people not being willing to take risks because they see they will need to wait longer for technologies to mature and missing that opportunity totally.
Interesting. We know it's not your first visit in Israel. You've already been here, what, 6 times?
Yeah.
6 times. It's always interesting to hear from outsider what your view on Israel.
I've always enjoyed my visits to Israel because it's very refreshing. Everybody is so creative. The first time I came here, I ran out of visiting cards because I got a pile of cards at the meeting. Unfortunately, with every young Israeli entrepreneur telling me that everyone else was a fraud, only he was the real player. Whatever it is, it's a country of very creative people, very innovative, very willing to stand something at risk. And for me, it's been a very exhilarating experience. The sad part is that a country like India, which I think fills some gaps that Israel has, that I mentioned, having a big market, low-cost manufacturing base, we haven't been able to come together enough and to synergize the opportunities that might exist. I know that for most part, most Israeli startups look at the United States as the place to go and have your IPO or to grow your business. But I urge both my counterparts in India, as also the Israeli startups, to look at each other's country, because I think there's a tremendous opportunity that exists for Israeli and Indian companies to work together and do something that the world can look at and say happened.
Well, one last question. When is your next visit?
Pardon?
When is your next visit?
I don't know, my current visit ends this afternoon, so...
Yeah, that was a joke. Mr. Tata, thank you very much for your time. And it was a really pleasure hosting you.
Thank you very much.